Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. How does a private trail turn into community property overnight? One new subdivision moved in, started hiking through my family's land, and when hunting season hit, they called the police like I was a criminal. Then the HOA sent demands. I didn't argue, I acted, and that's when the real chaos started. I've lived on my family's property for most of my life. We're talking about a decent chunk of land, around 80 acres of mostly wooded terrain with some open fields. It's rural, quiet, and honestly perfect for someone who values privacy and the outdoors. My grandfather bought this land decades ago when it was dirt cheap, back when nobody wanted to live this far out from town. He built a modest house, raised my dad here, and eventually my dad raised me on the same property. The land has always been used for hunting. My grandfather hunted, my dad hunted, I hunt. It's part of our family tradition, and frankly, it's how we've always managed the deer population on our property. We're not talking about some free-for-all situation either. I have all the proper licenses, follow all state regulations, use designated hunting stands, and only hunt during legal seasons. I'm not some yahoo shooting at anything that moves. This is responsible, legal hunting on private property. About 7 years ago, a developer bought the land adjacent to ours and built a housing development. It's one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions with identical houses and streets named after trees that don't actually grow in our region. The development is technically outside our property line by a good distance, but close enough that some of the residents started to think they had opinions about what I did on my own land. Of course, they formed a homeowners association. For the first year or so, there was no interaction between us. They stayed in their development, I stayed on my property. Occasionally, I'd see some of them driving past on the main road, but that was about it. The problem started when some of the HOA residents discovered there was a trail that cut through my property. Now, this trail wasn't some official public path. It was an old trail that my grandfather had cleared decades ago for accessing different parts of our property. Over the years, some locals knew about it and would occasionally use it as a shortcut to reach the public woods on the other side of our land. My family never really cared because it was just a few people here and there, usually folks we knew from town who were respectful and didn't cause any problems. But once the HOA residents discovered this trail, everything changed. Within about 6 months, every weekend there would be groups of people from the development using the trail to access the public woods beyond my property. They'd park on the edge of my land, walk through my property, and spend their day hiking in the public forest. Then they'd come back through my property to get to their cars. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'm not some territorial jerk who wants to keep everyone off my land for no reason. But the problem was that these people started treating my private property like it was a public park. They'd let their dogs run loose without leashes. They'd leave trash along the trail. Some of them would wander off the trail and explore other parts of my property. I started finding beer cans in places nowhere near the trail. I put up some polite signs along the trail reminding people that this was private property and asking them to stay on the trail and pack out their trash. The signs were ignored. I even went to one of the HOA meetings to introduce myself and politely ask if they could remind their residents to be respectful when using the trail. The HOA board acted like I was doing them a favor by letting their residents use my land, which was annoying, but they agreed to send out a notice about respecting private property. Things got a bit better for a few weeks, then went right back to how they were. But I still didn't make a big deal about it. Live and let live, right? Then hunting season rolled around. I had set up my deer stand in the same area I'd been using for years, far from the trail and deep in the woods on my property. I was following all the regulations, wearing my orange vest, and hunting during legal hours. On the second day of the season, I was in my stand early in the morning when I heard voices. A group of HOA residents were hiking through on the trail, which was annoying but not unexpected. What I didn't expect was for one of them to spot me in my stand and completely freak out. This woman started yelling about how there was someone in the woods with a gun. Her friend pulled out a cell phone and called the police. I climbed down from my stand and walked over to explain that I was hunting legally on my own property, but they weren't interested in listening. They just kept saying that it was dangerous and irresponsible to hunt near a public trail. I tried to explain that it wasn't a public trail, it was a private trail on my private property, but the woman just kept yelling about how they had been using this trail for over a year and I had no right to hunt where people were walking. The police showed up about 20 minutes later. The officer knew me, knew my family, and knew that I had every right to hunt on my own property. He checked my licenses, confirmed everything was legal, and told the HOA residents that they were actually the ones trespassing on private property. The officer suggested I put up some more signs making it clear that this was private property and that hunting was taking place during season. I thanked him and did exactly that. I put up multiple signs along the trail explaining that this was private property, that hunting took place during legal seasons, and that anyone using the trail did so at their own risk. You'd think that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, I received a letter from the HOA. I remember opening it at my kitchen table, expecting maybe some kind of apology or at least an acknowledgement that their residents had been in the wrong. Instead, they were informing me that they had received complaints about my hunting activities and that I was creating a dangerous situation for residents who used the trail. The letter stated that I must ensure the safety of community members utilizing the trail and must cease any dangerous activities that could endanger trail users. The letter specifically demanded I stop all hunting within 500 yards of the trail on weekends and that I maintain the trail in safe condition for community use. I read the letter 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This HOA, which had no jurisdiction over my property whatsoever, was trying to dictate what I could do on my own land. My hands were shaking as I looked up property lawyers online. I found one who specialized in property disputes and called him that afternoon. The lawyer looked over the letter during our meeting and actually laughed. He told me to ignore it. The HOA had zero authority over my property and couldn't enforce anything. He suggested I write back explaining this and reminding them that the trail was on private property and that I was under no obligation to allow anyone to use it. I sent a polite letter back explaining exactly that. I wasn't trying to be confrontational, I just wanted them to understand the reality of the situation. I included copies of my property deed, hunting licenses, and the relevant state regulations showing that everything I was doing was legal. The HOA responded by filing a complaint with the county sheriff's department claiming I was recklessly discharging firearms near a public path. The sheriff's department sent a deputy out to investigate. It was the same officer who had responded to the original call. He was clearly annoyed at having his time wasted. He took a report, noted that everything I was doing was legal, and told me he'd include in his report that the trail was private property and that the HOA residents were technically trespassing. But the HOA wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, every single time I went hunting, someone from the HOA would call in a complaint. The sheriff's department would have to send someone out, they'd confirm everything was legal and then leave. This happened at least 8 times over the course of a month. The deputies were getting increasingly frustrated with the HOA for wasting their time and resources. One deputy told me off the record that they were documenting all the calls, and that it was starting to look like harassment. Then, about 3 weeks after the first letter, I received another envelope from the HOA. I opened it standing in my driveway and felt my stomach drop. It was a formal citation claiming I owed them a fine for violating community standards by hunting near residential areas. The fine was for $2,000. I sat down on my front steps and just stared at the paper. $2,000 for hunting on my own property. Looking back, I think they were hoping I wouldn't know my rights and would just pay it to avoid trouble. Or maybe they genuinely didn't understand property law. Either way, it was completely unenforceable, but it made me angrier than anything else they'd done up to that point. I called my lawyer immediately. He was even more amused than before and explained that this was one of the most ridiculous things he'd seen in his career. The HOA was trying to fine me for activities on my own property that they had absolutely no jurisdiction over. He sent them a letter explaining that their citation was invalid, that they had no authority over my property, and that if they continued this harassment, we would pursue legal action for abuse of process. The HOA backed off on the fine, but the complaints to the sheriff's department continued. Every weekend during hunting season, multiple calls would come in. The sheriff himself eventually called me and apologized for the situation. He told me that his department was required to respond to every call, but that he was documenting the pattern of harassment. He suggested I consider restricting access to the trail since it was private property and the HOA residents were abusing the privilege. I spent a few days thinking about it. Part of me felt bad about cutting off access that people had gotten used to, even though they'd only been using it regularly for a couple of years. My family had always been the type to share what we had. But then I'd remember the woman yelling at me on my own property, the constant police calls wasting everyone's time, the ridiculous fine they tried to hit me with. Why should I continue doing them a favor when they were actively trying to control what I did on my own land? I made my decision. I was going to close the trail. I called my lawyer and asked him what I needed to do to legally restrict access to my property. He explained that since it was private property, I had every right to prohibit trespassing. He suggested I post proper signage, install a gate if needed, and send a formal notice to the HOA informing them that access was being revoked. I started by having a survey company come out and clearly mark my property boundaries along the trail access point. This took about 2 weeks to schedule and complete, which gave me time to think about whether I was really going to go through with it. Every time I second-guessed myself, I'd remember that citation for $2,000, and my resolve would harden. Then I had a contractor install a locked gate at the point where the trail entered my property from the road. The gate was substantial, made of steel, and impossible to bypass without going significantly out of the way through rough terrain. The contractor did good work and had it up in 2 days. I put up multiple signs on both sides of the gate. Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. I also installed trail cameras near the gate to document anyone who tried to bypass it or tamper with it. This turned out to be a smart move because the first week after I installed the gate, someone cut the lock off twice. I filed police reports both times and the cameras caught everything. After 2 people were caught on camera and cited for criminal mischief and trespassing, the vandalism stopped. Then I sent a formal letter to the HOA. The letter explained that due to ongoing harassment, false complaints to law enforcement, and the attempted citation and fine for legal activities on my private property, I was revoking access to the trail across my land. The letter made it clear that anyone who trespassed would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. My lawyer also included a section warning them about abuse of process and malicious prosecution, noting that we had documented evidence of their pattern of false complaints and that further harassment could result in legal action against the HOA and individual board members. The reaction was immediate and intense. The HOA president showed up at my door the very next day. She was furious and demanded I remove the gate immediately. She claimed that the trail had been used by the community for years and that I had no right to suddenly close it. I explained calmly that it had always been private property, that regular access had only been happening for about 2 years, that this access had been a courtesy that was being abused, and that the decision was final. She threatened to sue me for blocking access to public lands. I pointed out that there were other ways to access the public woods. They just required driving an extra 15 minutes around to the official entrance on the other side. Her argument was that the trail through my property had always been the convenient shortcut, and that families with children relied on it. I reminded her about the fine they tried to issue me, the constant false police reports, and the demands that I stop hunting on my own land. I asked her if she really thought I should continue allowing people to use my property when they were actively trying to interfere with my legal use of my own land. She didn't have a good answer for that. She tried to negotiate, suggesting that maybe we could work out designated days when hunting wouldn't occur and the trail could be used. I told her I wasn't interested in negotiating. The decision was made. Then she pulled out her copy of the HOA's letter to me, the one with all their demands about trail safety. She tried to use it against me, saying I was obligated to maintain safe access. That's when I pulled out my own copy of their letter. I told her that I was happy to comply with their demand to ensure the safety of community members utilizing the trail. The absolute safest way to ensure trail users' safety was to prevent anyone from using the trail at all. I was also complying with their demand that I maintain the trail in safe condition for community use by maintaining it exclusively for my own private use on my own private property. Exactly what they asked for. Her face went red and she left without another word. The HOA sent another letter threatening legal action. My lawyer responded with a detailed letter explaining property law and the right to exclude, along with another reminder about the documented harassment and a suggestion that they might want to reconsider pursuing legal action that they would inevitably lose while also exposing themselves to a countersuit. That's when things got really interesting on social media. The HOA residents started complaining loudly on their community Facebook page and at public meetings. They painted me as some unreasonable hermit who was blocking access to nature for families and children. They conveniently left out all the parts about the harassment, the false police reports, and their attempts to fine me for legal activities on my own property. Some of them tried to bypass the gate by hiking through the rough terrain around it. My trail cameras caught several of these incidents. I filed trespassing reports with the sheriff's department each time. A few people were actually cited for trespassing, which seemed to get the message across to most of the residents that I was serious. The HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. I heard about it later from someone in town who attended. According to them, there was a lot of anger directed at me, but there was also a significant group of residents who pointed out that antagonizing someone and then being surprised when they exercised their property rights wasn't exactly smart. Apparently, there was quite a bit of internal conflict because many residents hadn't known about the harassment campaign and weren't happy to learn about it. Some people were apparently furious with the board for costing them their convenient trail access. The HOA board tried to organize a letter-writing campaign to the county supervisors asking them to use eminent domain to create a public easement across my property. The county attorney's office responded by pointing out that eminent domain requires a compelling public interest and that convenience for a private development's residents didn't meet that standard, especially when there was already public access to the public woods via the official entrance. Over the next few months, the anger gradually died down as people accepted the new reality. The official entrance to the public woods is about 15 minutes further by car, and apparently many of the HOA residents decided it wasn't worth the extra drive. I heard from someone in town that trail usage in that public forest dropped significantly. I also heard that some of the HOA residents who had been most vocal about my hunting and most active in filing false reports ended up facing significant backlash from their own neighbors. Apparently, once it became clear that their actions had resulted in everyone losing access to a convenient trail, they weren't very popular anymore. One family apparently sold their house and moved because of the conflict within the HOA. The new board president eventually sent me a letter apologizing for the previous board's actions and asking if there was any possibility of working something out regarding trail access. I appreciated the apology, I really did. But the answer was still no. The trust was gone. I was not going to reopen the trail just so a future board could decide, all over again, that their convenience mattered more than my rights on my own land. Since the gate went up, hunting season has been peaceful. No false police reports, no harassment, no attempted fines, no strangers wandering through my woods with unleashed dogs, no beer cans tossed off the trail. The wildlife has come back into areas that used to get constant weekend foot traffic. The property feels like mine again. Every now and then, the trail cameras catch someone standing at the gate looking annoyed or confused like they still expect it to open for them. It never does. The HOA residents had treated that trail like a right when it had only ever been a courtesy. My family had allowed respectful neighbors to use it for years because they asked, behaved themselves, and understood they were guests on private land. The HOA did not do that. They used the trail, trashed it, let dogs run loose, called the police on me for legal hunting, and then tried to fine me for using my own property the way my family had used it for generations. Then they demanded I ensure the safety of their residents using the trail, so I did. I stopped them from using it. The trail remains closed, the gate remains locked, the signs are still posted. I still hunt every season in the same areas I always have, only now I do it in peace. They wanted to control my property while taking advantage of it. Now they get neither. Seems fair to me. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Inspired by another post about removed admin privileges, here is one of my own stories about internal company ideas crashing directly into external reality. I was working remotely for a European-based manufacturer of high-end broadcast processing equipment. At least in my division, the equipment was extremely specialized, technically demanding, and very dependent on configuration. The company also made other professional equipment, but this area was by far the most complex. The technical staff and developers in Europe were great. We had a strong relationship because we were all tech nerds who could happily talk about IP ranges and capacitor values for hours. The United States office, however, mostly just took orders from headquarters overseas. They had some good basic technicians, but they were not set up to handle high-end troubleshooting. That was exactly why my position existed. At the time, there was an acquisition coming up, and auditors started getting involved. We had to send in an inventory of all our computers, test gear, and other equipment. That was fine. Annoying but understandable. The problem was that I was right in the middle of a huge project with one of the largest broadcasters in the United States. That project had already resulted in one of the largest upgrade sales our division had ever made, and I was testing some brand new SNMP features that had just come out of development. This was older technology that was still being used in very specific broadcast environments, so I had enlisted an older Supermicro server that I had barely been using. Previously, it had mostly been there so I could remotely access some equipment in my workshop. I repurposed it to run basic SNMP functions and make sure the new features did not break anything before I put them on air across more than 50 stations. The testing process was going well. I would receive a new revision first thing in the morning, test it, push it hard for a while, and then send it off to my technical contact at the network by the end of my day, which was his morning. It was not terribly difficult work, but it was extremely niche, and it was also one of the reasons I worked for the company. Almost nobody in North America knew how to deal with this particular equipment at that level. Then the auditors got involved, and the North American office saw the Supermicro server on the inventory list. Apparently this was the end of the world. Why was there a server out in the field? Why did I need so much test equipment? Who approved this? Why was it not back at the office? My first couple of replies were basically ignored because no one there understood what I was talking about. Eventually, someone made the decision that the server absolutely had to be returned. I explained, for the third time, that the server was actively being used for a critical project and asked who would be taking over the testing if they insisted on taking it back. That fell on deaf ears. It was suddenly the most important thing in the entire world that they get this server back. For context, this was a junky old one-rack unit Supermicro utility box that was probably worth around $1,000 at most. For whatever reason, I was feeling extra snarky on the day I was supposed to box it up, so instead of quietly sending it back, I wrote a very friendly note to all the technicians, the decision makers at the United States office, my technical contact at the network, and his boss. In the email, I introduced everyone and thanked the United States office for taking over this critical project. I also thanked headquarters for helping with this time-sensitive testing phase, since it would free me up to work on other critical projects. About 25 minutes later, I sent the tracking information for all the equipment I was supposed to send back. I still had not actually boxed up the server. About an hour later, I got a very odd email from one of the decision makers in the United States office. He clearly did not want to admit that nobody at headquarters understood the technical side of what I was doing. At the same time, he had apparently realized that this was a huge account and that another big sale would absolutely affect their bonuses. So they tried to save face by suggesting that maybe I should get their technicians up to speed on the project before we did anything drastic. I replied with the tracking information again and mentioned that I had already suggested exactly that 3 times. About 25 minutes after that, I got a panicked phone call from the head technician at the United States office. He and his superior, the same decision maker, had just received a very pleasant call from my contact's boss at the network. The network was apparently thrilled with the service so far. They were excited that someone else would be helping test the updates because that would allow me to be on site more often. They started talking about big future plans. Then came the obvious question, who exactly was going to do this work now? Suddenly, it mattered. I repeated that I had brought this issue up 3 times already, so clearly the decision had been made with full understanding. They knew best. Now there was full-blown panic at the United States office. Knowing this, I sent a note to the developers in Europe and told them to send the new updated code to the catch-all address for the United States technical team instead of sending it to me, since they would be doing the testing going forward. That had the desired effect. The head of development in Europe immediately got on the phone with the decision maker in the United States office, asking who they had recently hired, without approval, who was qualified enough to handle those in-house testing resources now. By the time the UPS pickup was supposed to happen, somehow getting that old server back was no longer the highest priority. In fact, I never heard about the server again. The next one is an entitled people story. About a year ago, we went to Mexico to get my husband's dog. I had deliberately booked a direct flight from Mexico City to Chicago because the poor dog had to travel in the luggage compartment. I wanted her to go up once, be in the air for 4 hours, come down once, and then be taken straight outside to pee. She had never flown before, and we had to hand her over to the airline, sealed in her crate, 2.5 hours before our flight even boarded. But of course, best-laid plans do not always work out. The only flight that worked for us in terms of timing and money was on one of the budget Mexican airlines. If you have never flown on one before, I actually recommend it. I low-key love flying on budget Mexican airlines. They are inexpensive and kind of hilarious. They have ads on the baggage compartment covers like you are on the subway or a bus, and everyone brings full meals with them because they charge even for water. In my experience, everyone is usually in a good mood. That said, I would not repeat this particular flight because they had packed so many extra seats into the plane that it unexpectedly weighed too much. Because of that, we had to make an unplanned stop in a northern Mexican city to refuel. Our flight, which was supposed to arrive in Chicago around midnight, ended up landing closer to 3 in the morning. We got through immigration mostly quickly because we were the only flight landing at that time. My husband was traveling on advance parole, and I am a United States citizen, so they separated us at the border. I had to go wait in the baggage claim area by myself. Almost the entire plane full of passengers was stuck there, waiting and waiting for their luggage in that strange liminal space between immigration and customs. I do not know if the baggage handlers had a shift change at 3 in the morning or if there were only 2 people working the late night shift. But we waited at least 45 minutes before any bags came down the ramp. Even then, the luggage came out slowly in little bursts. I was standing off in the corner waiting for them to bring our dog through the oversized baggage door when a woman appeared with her tiny dog. She was one of those women with perfect hair and dramatic nails even at almost 4 in the morning. Her little fluffball dog was trotting behind her on a jeweled leash. There were signs all over the area saying animals had to remain in their crates, but she had taken her dog out and was walking him around the baggage claim area. She kept leading him into corners and toward likely targets, like the rent-a-cart rail, clearly encouraging him to do his business. She spent a lot of time near where another man and I were waiting for oversized baggage and animals, probably because there were fewer people there. But she also looped around the entire perimeter of the baggage claim area 3 or 4 times. Finally, on her 4th or 5th pass, an airport security officer came over. He looked like he was one coffee away from a blood pressure crisis. He told her to put her dog back in the carrier she was holding. She immediately started explaining that the flight had been so long her precious little dog needed to pee. He could not possibly be expected to hold it that long, and now it was the airport's fault because they were trapped waiting for luggage. She said she did not want her dog to suffer. The security officer told her again to put the dog back in the carrier. She kept arguing that she could not possibly do that because it was unfair to her poor dog. The security officer pointed to one of the signs and repeated that she needed to put the dog away. Instead, she huffed, turned her back on him, and walked away, still leading her dog into corners and encouraging him to let it all out. I had nothing else to do, and watching this was distracting me from worrying about why my husband was taking so long, so I just kept watching. The first security officer walked over toward the doors leading to customs and got another officer. This second one had different insignia and handcuffs hanging from the back of his belt. The 2 of them caught up with her halfway across the baggage claim area. I could see her gesturing and shaking her head. I could hear her voice rising, though I could not make out the words. She kept pointing at the dog, the empty luggage ramp, and the baggage belt. Finally, the second officer reached behind his back and pulled out the handcuffs. At that point, she immediately bent down, scooped her dog into the carrier, and suddenly seemed very willing to listen while they told her something else before returning to their posts. Right around then, my dog and my husband were both released from border limbo almost simultaneously, though from different doors, so I lost track of the woman. But I am pretty sure that if she had succeeded, she would have left her dog's mess right in the middle of the floor for everyone else to step in. The next one is an entitled parent story. To preface this, I live in Iceland. At the time this happened, I lived in downtown Reykjavik, where there are a lot of tourists every day. Many tourists are perfectly respectful, but a lot of them can also be entitled and rude toward locals. Some treat us like we are part of a zoo, or like we are somehow in the way just by living our lives while they pose for photos in the middle of sidewalks, streets, or places where cars are driving. This kind of entitlement is not just annoying, it can also be dangerous. Thousands of tourists visit beaches and nature areas that are closed off with warning signs, some even with flashing red lights telling people not to go near the water or not to enter at all. Some still climb over rocks and fences that are there for safety just to pose in front of the waves, putting their own lives and sometimes their children's lives at risk for no reason other than a photo opportunity. I am sure this happens in many places with heavy tourism, but I am just trying to explain what it feels like from the point of view of people who actually live here and have to deal with this kind of behavior almost every day, especially in downtown Reykjavik. On this particular day, I was walking my cat on a leash downtown. We had already been stopped multiple times by tourists asking if they could pet her. I do not mind when people ask first, and I usually say yes, unless my cat clearly does not want to be touched. I always thank people for asking and for respecting her boundaries. But by the time we were heading home, she had already been stopped a lot, and she was no longer in the mood to be petted. On our way back, we were walking up Skola Verdustigur, right near the bottom by the Rainbow Street, when I heard an American accent very close behind me saying, "Are you going to go and pet the kitty?" Go and pet the kitty. The way they said it made it clear they were talking to a child. I turned around and saw a child walking ahead of their family, heading straight for my cat. The child tried to grab her, so I stepped between them and kindly said no. I explained that my cat did not want to be petted right now. Then I moved closer to the wall and made space for the family to pass us. We got a little farther up the street and the family slowed down, so we passed them again. I had headphones on, but only over one ear so I could still hear my surroundings. That meant I heard them again encouraging their child to go pet my cat once they were behind me. Again, I kindly said no and made room for them to pass in front of us. But they did not pass. Instead, they stayed behind us and kept asking their child, in a sing-song voice, "Are you going to go and pet the kitty?" They followed us for around 10 minutes up Skola Verdustigur. I repeatedly had to tell them no and step between the child and my cat. I picked my cat up several times while waiting for them to leave, but I kept putting her back down because she wanted to walk by herself. She knew the route home and wanted to keep going. At one point, we passed them again after they had stopped walking for no clear reason. Then the child ran up from behind us and grabbed at my cat's tail. My cat hissed and swiped warning scratches in the air. She did not scratch him or bite him, but she was giving very clear warning signs. I stepped between them again, picked up my cat, and finally lost my patience. I told the parents to get their child, then told them to leave us alone and stop harassing and following us. I explained that I had given them multiple opportunities to walk ahead of us, but they kept stopping for no reason just to get behind us again and let their child try to grab at my cat. At that point, it absolutely felt like harassment. The parents did not even try to deny that they had been following us or ignoring me. The only thing they focused on was that I had sworn in front of their child. Suddenly, they were yelling at me for that and getting in my face. I told them I would not have had to swear if they had listened during the 10 minutes when I was politely telling them no and asking them to leave us alone. I had been patient until they let their child physically grab my cat's tail without doing anything to stop him. I was still holding my cat, so I walked away and carried her for the rest of the walk home, which was about 5 more minutes. Luckily, they did not follow us the rest of the way, but I was fuming the entire time. We have had other situations where people got mad because I said my cat did not want to be petted at that moment. People have tried to pick her up without permission, and people have shouted things at us. But this was another level of entitlement compared to what we had dealt with before. I did not really blow up at them, so maybe this is not dramatic enough for some people or does not have a satisfying ending. But this is what happened. I do not blame the child because their parents were the ones encouraging them to pet my cat. I absolutely blame the parents for refusing to respect boundaries and acting like being told no did not apply to them. Please, if you travel to other countries, respect the locals. And if you travel to Iceland, here is a tip. Respect the nature as well as the people who live here. We are getting very tired of entitled tourists who come here and show no respect to anyone or anything. Anyway, thank you for watching.